Hello students. In this video, let us start the first poem for 10th standard second language English, Grandma Climbs a Tree. Now this is a poem by the poet and writer Ruskin Bond. Let's see what this poem is about. My grandmother was a genius. You'd like to know why? Because she could climb trees spreading or high. She'd be up their branches in a trice, and mind you, when last she climbed a tree, she was 62. Ever since childhood, she'd had this gift for being happier in a tree than in a lift. Now, in the beginning of the poem, Ruskin Bond talks about how the grandmother of the person who's saying this poem was a genius. And the poet is asking us if we would like to know why. So the grandmother, she could climb trees, spreading or high. Now spreading trees are those trees that are wide in their appearance. So as you can see here, this tree is spreading wide. Whereas high trees or tall trees are the ones that go in the upward direction. So they are tall trees. Now the poet is saying that the grandmother could climb any type of trees, whether they are spreading or high. She'd be up their branches in a thrice. In a thrice meaning in a short period of time. And mind you, so whenever somebody says mind you, what it means is pay attention. So pay attention to what I'm about to say. And the poet is saying the last time she climbed a tree was when she was 62 years old. And the poet feels like the grandmother, ever since her childhood, she'd had this gift. So she had this gift. So this is one of those instances where the word had can be used in succession without anything in between. So she had this gift since her childhood. What was the gift? The gift was that she was happier in a tree than in a lift. Now we can interpret it this way. Grandmother was very close to nature and she felt at home in nature than in any urban setting. Now next, and though as years went by, she would be told that climbing trees should stop when she grew old. So as the grandmother grows old, it's expected that people around her, they try to discourage her from trying to climb trees because it may not be very safe. And that growing old should be done gracefully. She'd laugh and say, when I grow disgracefully, I can do it better. So the grandmother, she doesn't agree with people who are discouraging her. She is saying, well, I'll grow disgracefully and I can do that better. So what grandmother means to say here is she does not want to conform to any societal made up standards. So she is saying, why is it that I have to grow old gracefully? I'll do it disgracefully because I can grow disgracefully better than I can grow old gracefully. By this, she means that she'll be happier if she does it disgracefully. And we had to agree, for in all the garden there wasn't a tree. She hadn't been up at one time or another, having learned to climb from a loving brother when she was 6. But it was feared by all that one day she'd have a terrible fall. Now the poet is talking about multiple things in these lines. So grandmother is saying that she can grow old disgracefully and that for in all the garden there wasn't a tree she hadn't been up one time or another. So these two lines, you'll understand them if you read them together. So what the poet is saying is that the garden was full of trees and grandmother had been up them one time or another. So this is another way of saying that she can climb any tree in the garden. That is why everybody had to agree with her when she laughed and said, I can do it better. Also, we learn here from where did grandmother learn to climb trees? So, grandmother, she learned to climb trees from her loving brother when she was just a child. So, she was 6 years old and her brother taught her how to climb trees. But still, everybody is afraid for the grandmother and they think that she might suffer a terrible fall. The outcome was different. While we were in town, she climbed the tree and couldn't come down. Now, this is a very anticlimactic event that is taking place because grandmother climbs up the trees, no problems. But the outcome was different because she climbed a tree without any problems, but she could not come down. So maybe climbing trees was easier to her than climbing down the same tree. So she climbs them up, but what happens is when everybody was in town for some work, she looks at that time and she feels that she wants to climb a tree. She climbs it up, but she cannot come down. After the rescue, the doctor took Granny's temperature and said, I strongly recommend a quiet week in bed. We sighed with relief and tucked her up well. Poor Granny! For her, it was like a brief season in hell. Confined to her bedroom while every breeze whispered of summer and dancing leaves. Now, she is rescued from up the tree and her family takes her to the doctor. And the doctor examines her. So the doctor, he or she, examines Granny and what they say is that they recommend a quiet week in bed. So they have recommended bed rest. Everybody of the family is relieved because they thought something worse might have happened. But the doctor says everything is okay, just have a week of bed rest. But for Granny, it was like hell because the season is wonderful outside. It's summer, it's breezy, and there's dancing leaves everywhere, and she does not want to have bed rest. So, when we think about this, there are people all around us that are happiest when they are active. So, not everybody likes to have rest all the time. In fact, to some people, like Granny in our poem, recommending bed rest would be very sad to them. But she had held her peace till she felt stronger. Then she sat up and said, I'll lie here no longer. And she called for my father and told him undaunted that a house in a treetop was what she now wanted. My dad knew his duty and he said, That's all right. You'll have what you want, dear. I'll start work tonight. Now, grandmother, she waits till she regains her strength and then she calls up her son, who is the father of the poet. Okay? So she calls up her son and she's saying she wants a treetop house and dad is agreeing. He's saying, okay, I'll build you a house atop the tree for you and I'll start work tonight. Now here, undaunted is without any fear or hesitation. So she doesn't fear when she wants to ask her son something. Instead, she is asking it directly. Next, with my expert assistance, he soon finished the chore, made her a tree house with windows and a door. So Granny moved up and now every day I climb to her room with glasses and tray. She sits there in state and drinks sherry with me, upholding her right to reside in a tree. Now, this is the happy ending of the poem. The family builds Granny a treetop house and she moves up to the treetop house. And the poet, every day, he brings her snacks and they drink it together on the treetop house. Okay, students, let us start with the understand the poem section. So in here, the first question is, the speaker in the poem does not call his grandmother childish. What else was she according to him? Why does he consider her to be so? So the lines that we need to consider to answer this are lines 1 to 4. So here I have given the answer. The speaker in the poem does not call his grandmother childish, instead calls her a genius. He calls her a genius because she could climb trees. Regardless of whether they were high or wide, she would climb them very quickly. So this is why the speaker calls his grandmother a genius. Now the next question is, grandmother had been in the habit of climbing trees for a very long period. Identify the lines that suggest this. Now when we look at the poem, in the beginning the speaker tells us that she last climbed a tree when she was 62. So she started when she was very young, when she was just 6 years old, and she continued to climb trees till she was 62. Even after this, even during the current situation when the poem is being written also, grandmother climbs another tree. These are the lines that suggest to us that grandmother had been in the habit of climbing trees for a very long time. So the lines, having learned to climb from a loving brother when she was 6, and when last she climbed a tree she was 62, suggest that grandma started climbing trees when she was 6 and continued till she was 62. Thus we can understand that grandma had been in the habit of climbing trees for a very long period of time. Next, question 3. Look at the lines 7 and 8. She would be told. Who do you think would tell her so? Let's take a look at the lines. So here we have the lines that she would be told that climbing trees should stop when one grew old. Now people around her, perhaps her family and friends, would tell her this. So here is the answer to question 3. Perhaps it was her friends and family who would be concerned about her and tell her that the tree climbing should stop when she grew old. Next, do you find anything odd in the reply given by grandma? If so, why do you think it is odd? Now the lines this question is referring to are lines 10 and 11. So these two. She'd laugh and say, well, I'll grow disgracefully. I can do it better. So we need to think about this reply that grandmother gives. Grandma replies that she would like to grow old disgracefully as she feels that she could do it better. The reply, so it's a single reply. The reply is odd because generally one would like to grow old gracefully, whereas grandma wishes for the opposite. Next, others had feared that Granny would fall from a tree one day or the other. Did this happen or did something else happen? So we know that Granny did not fall from a tree. Instead, she easily climbed up a tree, but the exact opposite happened and she could not climb down. Granny did not fall from a tree. Instead, she was able to climb a tree but could not come down. She had to be rescued from the tree. Next, what had the doctor recommended? What was the reaction of the kids to this advice? So we can take a look at the poem here. I strongly recommend a quiet week in bed. We sighed with relief and tucked her up well. So, the doctor's recommendation, so we can say this two ways, the doctor recommended or the doctor's recommendation was. So, the doctor recommended a quiet week in bed. The kids were all relieved to hear this advice and tucked grandma into bed. Quote the lines which suggest how wholeheartedly Granny enjoyed climbing a tree. So, the lines that suggest this are: for being happier in a tree than in a lift. Now, in the beginning of the poem, the last line over here, for being happier in a tree than in a lift. So, in the introduction itself, the speaker makes it very clear that Grandma loved climbing trees by saying this line. We can also add other lines, including the lines where she feels that she wanted a treetop house, and as soon as she got one, she moved up the treetop house. So these are the lines. For being happier in a tree than in lift. For all in the garden, there wasn't a tree she hadn't been up at one time or another. And the line that a house in a treetop was what she wanted, what she now wanted. So these three lines suggest how wholeheartedly Granny enjoyed climbing a tree. Next question. My dad knew his duties. What do you think his duty was? Now, as soon as Granny requests a treetop house, the father, he knows his duties. What duty do you think it's being referred to right now? The speaker's dad's duty was to take care of his mother in her old age and fulfill her wishes and to ensure that she was happy. Next, look at the picture below the title. Quote the lines that might have guided the artist to draw that. So the lines that a house in a treetop was what she now wanted, and with my expert assistance, he soon finished the chore, made her a tree house with windows and a door. So Granny moved up, and now every day I climb her room with glasses and tray. Now you can also write only these two parts of those two lines, but because the question is quote the complete lines, I have just added everything in that line. So these are the lines that suggest or could have guided the artist to draw the picture. Next, read and appreciate. A section is read the poem again. Does the behavior of Grandma strike you as unusual? If so, support your view quoting her ways and responses to others. One is done for you. So, Grandma climbing a tree is one way where her behavior is unusual. And other ways could be that she does not like bed rest. So most people might not be so unhappy with bed rest as Granny was. To her, it was like a brief season in hell. So this can be one of those lines. And another action is that she is drinking sherry on top of the treehouse. So sherry is a kind of wine. So this may be unusual behavior that is different from others. You can also think of others and add to these lists. So the next question is, growing old gracefully is an expression used in the poem. Discuss with your partner whether what Grandma was doing was graceful or otherwise. Now, do you think the way Grandma lived her life and wanted to continue living was gracefully growing old or not? Discuss with your partner. So, I have given my opinion over here. Grandma chose to grow old doing what she wholeheartedly loved, that is, climbing trees. Because she chose to be happy, Grandma definitely grew old gracefully. So, this is my opinion that Grandma definitely grew old gracefully. Next, both the narrator, that is the speaker in the poem, and his father were very considerate towards Grandma. Substantiate the statement with textual support. Now, which parts of the poem talk about how considerate the speaker is about their grandmother? As you can see here in the beginning only, the speaker refers to his grandmother as a genius. They don't call her childish or anything, they call her a genius. Similarly, throughout the poem, you can see that they're very considerate towards grandmother. So the speaker's father, when the grandmother requests him for a treetop house, he readily agrees. And the speaker, he helps his grandmother to build her treetop house also, and also he provides her with food and drinks every day. So the answer is the narrator does not call his grandmother childish, instead calls her a genius for her love and skill for climbing trees quickly. He supports her love for trees by bringing her food and drinks in a tray when she moves atop the treehouse. The speaker's father doesn't oppose his mother's wishes to live atop a treehouse. He understands his duties and starts building her a house atop the tree on the same day she requests one. From these actions, we can understand that both the narrator and his father are very considerate towards grandma. Next, if you were to divide the entire poem into two parts, which line would you pick to be the beginning of the second part? Why? So, when we take a look at our poem, here in this line, she climbed the tree and couldn't come down. So, an entire story begins here. Until then, we are just given the context. We are told about grandma, how she likes climbing the tree, and how she learned to climb the tree and all that. But here, the current state in the poem begins with this line. She climbs a tree and cannot come down. So we can choose that line to be the beginning of the second part of the poem. Now let's go to B. Have a close look at the rhyme scheme. Write at least 5 pairs of rhyming words like, said, bed. Now you can choose any paragraph in the poem. It's very easy because the last words are rhyming. Chore door, day tray, me, tree. Stronger, longer, undaunted, wanted, right, and tonight. So you can choose any 5 and write for this question. Next we it was like a brief season. Name the figure of speech in this sentence. What are the two things that are compared? Explain. So when it comes to figures of speech of comparison, simile should be the first thing that comes to your mind whenever you look at the word like. So when we call a comparison to be a simile, whenever we are saying something is like something else. Whereas in case of metaphors, the word like would be absent. We will say that something is something else. For example, if the poet has said, it was a brief season in hell, without the word like, then it would have been a metaphor. Right now it's a simile. Okay? Now what are the two things that are being compared? So the first, we know that it's compared to a brief season of hell. What was being compared to a brief season of hell is bed rest for a week was compared to a brief season in hell. So that is the answer to question 2. Next, question 3. For being happier in a tree than in a lift, what is suggested through this line? Exchange your views with your partner. What is being suggested here is that, like we discussed, grandma was more at home in nature than she was in any urban setting. Now this was what is being expressed by this line. You can add your views and discuss. Next, There was not a tree she hadn't been up. Observe in this sentence, there are two words that are negative, not here and had not been up. So, what does this mean? There was not a single tree such that she hadn't been up that tree. So, this means that she had been up all the trees. When we are trying to rewrite such sentences, there needs to be some reformation and restructuring. So, when we try to write it without not, it becomes she had been up all the trees. Now, you need to give more examples outside the text to illustrate effective use of double negatives. I have given one example. There is no one who doesn't respect bravery. So this means everybody respects bravery. Okay? Finally, this is a drawing activity where you have to imagine what comes to your mind when you read these lines and try to draw the pictures. Take some time and think about these lines. Sit down and try to think about it and imagine what comes to your mind. Then, if you want to, you can take a piece of paper and sketch it out. Okay, students, this is the end of the poem Grandma Climbs a Tree. I have given all the answers in the description box below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I will see you all in the next video.